So next up, we have Livent, which is a 3.8 billion market cap company, NYSE traded $21. David Deckelbaum has a $35 target price and a buy recommendation. Livent went public in 2018 at around $18 or $17, so not the most stellar performance. It has very much of an institutional following, not a huge retail following, and maybe videos like this will, a little bit help with that. But I do notice that there are a number of companies, producing companies, that have projects in advanced stages of development that the market gives them almost no value for. And I think that is the case here with Nebraska inside Livent. So if you compare it to many of the other companies on this panel at earlier stage exploration, or even some that are reasonably advanced, they have very substantial market caps. And so with that, very privileged to have Sarah Maryssael here, who recently joined Livent in a business development capacity to focus on Canada in particular. She left Tesla. And we're having David Deckelbaum at Cowen, or TD Cowen now, who has covered Livent for quite some time. To all of our viewers who know my kind of go long what Tesla is short, and entrepreneurs should enter the mining and refining of lithium. I'm looking at Sarah and thinking that maybe she saw more upside in LTHM shares than TSLA shares, but I'm not expecting any comment on that, and I will let David start the questioning from here.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Sarah, for joining us today. Maybe just you can talk about just your initial impressions, just joining Livent as this emerging kind of dual producer from brine, obviously down in Argentina, and now this emerging projects up in Canada. Maybe some of your particular attraction to Nebraska and how you see it sort of fitting in broader lithium ecosystem, but really the broader Livent portfolio.
Sure. No, I think Nebraska has been a project that's been in the pipeline for a number of years now. It's well known to us folks in the industry. And now there's really a chance for Nebraska 2.0. I think it's coming in. It's a project that's coming in at a really sort of a very different time in the supply chain. I think we're seeing now, before I think there was maybe a lot of questions on whether the energy transition and electrification was real. I think today there is no doubt that the energy transition is happening. So we're entering, I would say, Nebraska, bringing on Nebraska online at a very different period in the supply chain. I think as well, with the announcement of the IRA in August last year, that has certainly been a game changer, and again puts the importance of Canadian lithium and lithium produced in FTA countries as well at top of the priority list. So there's a confluence of factors today, which I say from both a market standpoint and from a supply standpoint, which make Nebraska a really exciting project. I think beyond Nebraska, Canada is an exciting jurisdiction, again, for the benefits of the IRA, but also because a lot of consumers are now very focused on the importance of sustainability, of strong mining practices and a good rule of law, and obviously low carbon footprint, all of which we feel Canada really supports.
Sarah, it's interesting you brought up the IRA. It seems like plans at Nebraska maybe have changed to accelerate time to market. Can you talk about just maybe some of the alterations in the original plan at what you're going to be doing at Whabouchi and then subsequently downstream, particularly with the concept of selling hard rock spodumene concentrate into the market before lithium chemicals?
Sure. So as we've announced publicly, we'll be bringing on Whabouchi, hoping for the end of 24, early 25. Look, I think we really see ourselves as a strategic supplier to the battery supply chain. And so I think we still see the way that we would market that spodumene going to some strategic partners, which we hope to finalize in the coming months. I think now we're seeing OEMs and actually all players on the battery supply chain getting a lot more sophisticated with the tightness we're seeing in lithium. They're open to not just buying lithium hydroxide, but they're open to now buying intermediate products such as spodumene concentrate. And really, as part of that, I think it's an urgency to bring more supply to market. I would say it's very much part of seeing a supply chain that is maturing and really learning to take more risk in terms of how it manages and it controls its raw material supply.
And I guess, how do you think about just the downstream integration, that lag between bringing on Whabouchi versus subsequently bringing on Nebraska? How much of a natural lag is there?
No, I think part of creating that lag, so bringing on the spodumene first and then bringing on Bécancour conversion a couple of years later, I think that integration is difficult. And when you're trying to integrate from day one, that can create a lot of execution risk. So by staggering the two, I think it sort of, allows you to bring on the concentrator in time. I think get that producing product at a consistent level, allows you as well to monetize that from the sale of spodumene, and then sort of fine tune, obviously, as the conversion plant comes up, really sort of managing that integration. So rather than bring on two sites at the same time, staggering that really helps, I think, deal with the operational complexity and difficulties, especially because you're dealing with the qualification of a product like lithium hydroxide, which takes a lot of time. And so ensuring you've got a consistent feed of spodumene concentrate really helps as well in achieving that qualification milestones.
We've seen, at least with other hard rock projects in Quebec, a flurry of offtake agreements for spodumene. I guess where do you think that most of the initial year's production is going to end up? Does it ultimately get processed in China? Or are you seeing sort of available converters opening up in other parts of the world that you think would be a logical partner for Wabuchi?
I think in the near term, it's clear that a lot of that material is going to have to be processed in China, especially because I imagine that the concentrates that will be starting up will potentially be a variable spec and maybe not meet sort of the 5.56% lithium oxide. So in order to deal with that kind of inconsistency, I think China would be obviously the best outlet for that type of concentrate. I think it really depends on how quickly the other projects, there have been projects that have been announced in Texas, in potentially in Europe. It really depends how quickly they come to scale. They will also need to accept material relatively soon as they start to ramp up. I think China will always be the backstop until we see more of that refining capacity, qualified refining capacity, come to market.
I guess maybe you can take a step back and just talk about Canada in general as a market. The lithium industry, at least on the supply side, seems to have received a shot in the arm, at least from spodumene mines sort of proliferating in Quebec at this point. We obviously haven't seen much movement in the US on the upstream side. How would you kind of compare the market opportunities in Canada versus other parts of the world with natural, hard rock deposits in focus, maybe Africa, maybe Australia? Do you see this as a collaborative environment right now? Is it highly competitive? There's obviously a ton of focus on the government of building out Bécancour and this downstream sort of hub of battery-related materials.
I think we see a lot of potential, right? I think given sort of the history of mining processing within Canada, I think makes it a really strong jurisdiction for which to really bring in lithium chemicals as a specialty product. We see that it's extremely competitive. I think, look, if you look at Australia and how quickly Australia ramped up spodumene production back in 2018 in response to the demand, I think that we saw was quite impressive. I think the difference with Canada is, look, it's been underexplored relative to Australia, and we're seeing a lot of exploration activity. I think that Canada has made a commitment to try and streamline and shorten the permitting process where possible, but that in itself comes with challenges and also sort of dealing with the communities and the other standards which a lot of the producers need to abide by. So there is, I think, a lot of potential. I think as well it's going to be a question of the downstream, because we see that spodumene supply can come online if we look at Australia as a reference, as I said, back in 2018. But if we are going to restrict our ability to send that spodumene to China in order to be IRA compliant and to committed to regional supply chains, building out that downstream capacity in Canada is going to take longer. I think now it's safe to say that the bottleneck in the lithium supply chain is spodumene supply, and that is evident by the prices. Downstream capacity, not so much, because there is abundant capacity in China. But as the IRA, the geopolitics shifts, if we start to see again an increase in spodumene supply, that's going to shift potentially the bottleneck down to the downstream, especially if China then becomes restricted. I think it will be an interesting evolution of the prices and supply demand dynamics as a result of this geopolitics environment in which we're in today.
We really haven't seen a ton of consolidation in the industry. Perhaps it's just because the nature of these projects and Livent's relationship with Nebraska now dates back years, and now we have visibility to seeing production in the next couple of years, and that's perhaps coincident with how long it takes planning on these projects. But do you expect that this will be a cornerstone to set for further consolidation, particularly in hard rock, or do you think that we're just going to see some of these resources just getting larger over time, or are initial designs really the practical limitations of what these resources can bear?
No, I think, look, given that Canada maybe historically has been underexplored versus Australia, I think it's yet to see how big some of these resources can be. But certainly, I would say some of the results that we're seeing out of James Bay would indicate we could be having mega projects, spodumene projects out of Canada, and I think that will reveal itself probably in the next 12 to 18 months. On the topic of consolidation, absolutely, I think that is what is going to be needed to be successful. Right, we've seen that across many examples across decades where industries, as they mature, consolidate. And in order, I think, to increase speed to market, reduce project execution risk, that is exactly what's going to be needed. We need scale. And that is certainly what we're hearing, I think, from the market. If you speak to a lot of the supply chain, they don't want to be sourcing, 10,000 tons of hydroxide from 5-6 different players, right? They would rather be sourcing that equivalent volume from 2 or 3 major players. And that also is a question of speed to market, as I mentioned, but also in terms of qualification. It's much more complex to have to qualify 6 different suppliers, especially 6 different suppliers that have different abilities and maturities in terms of chemical processing. It becomes very difficult of a supply chain to manage. And I think as you move to more larger and more complex supply chains, battery supply chain is going to look for more consolidation in the way that it sources, as a way again to scale and to decrease qualification risk.
When you think about the future of lithium, 5-10 years from now, what do you think about how do you think about the efficiency of the market with multiple streams of hard rock at different grades, obviously different properties, going into singular converters, which is not the way that the industry is set up right now? How big of an issue do you think that this becomes? And then, how do you think about that longer term as you start to build out more of your own chemical capabilities?
I think, again, to achieve scale and quality, you have to sort of integrate as many of these facilities as possible. That's how you get and again, that really comes down to consistency of the feed. If you're tailoring a downstream process with different feed inputs, different blends that change on a regular basis, you just cannot operate your plants at optimum capacity. So I think that is certainly the near-term fix, and I think that is what we're seeing with spodumene being exported to China. But I think if you're really thinking about the long term, a lot of these projects will need to be integrated in some way. And I think that we need to challenge as well, what does integration look like, right? And how do we design these supply chains to be as efficient as possible? Is making an intermediate lithium sulfate a solution, right? And then exporting that to have that further refined in Europe? Or are you better off just taking that to direct to hydroxide close to the mine? I think these are the type of questions that we need to ask ourselves as we build out these supply chains. We need to make these supply chains as efficient as possible, not add complexity for the sake of adding complexity. So I think it will be interesting as we emerge, I think, really into the second chapter of this energy transition. I characterize the first chapter as really sort of the learning, the supply chain learning how this works, and now to actually executing. I think it'll be interesting to see how a lot of these supply chains are designed. And I think efficiency really needs to be the name of the game.
What are you most excited about in the next year or so, where if we were having this conversation again, we would look back and be like, man, look at all these things that happened at Nebraska. What are the things that are top of mind for you?
I think it's really seeing the OEMs and the battery supply chain getting more active and involved. I think seeing sort of a number of deals over the course of the last 6 to 9 months is really, I think, a good bellwether for what we're going to see again over the coming 12 to 18 months. And I think it's really a different business model playing out. I think as Howard pointed out in his opening remarks, the need for more entrepreneurship in mining. That's absolutely right. And I think that's exactly what the junior mining industry brings. And OEMs, I think, willing to take that risk is really a demonstration of that type of entrepreneurship spirit, which I think is exciting about the mining industry. We've seen the major miners today, I think, a reluctance to invest, and certainly a reluctance to invest in lithium, with obviously the exception of Rio Tinto. But I think you're really seeing the OEMs and junior miners, I think, really taking that and showing that they're willing to take the risk. And I think that is really exciting, because that's really a disruptor, I think, for the mining industry and the refining industry. So what I'm excited about is seeing more deals, whether that's with Nebraska or broadly in the industry. I think that is really what we should be looking out for.